Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited you're joining us on 33 Founders today because I'm here with Vasco Pedro, the co-founder of Unbabel. Thanks so much for being with me, Vasco.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to start out with you explaining how Unbabel works because you guys are really tapping into the translation market in a way that not many companies have yet.
Yeah, certainly. So Unbabel is a platform that combines artificial intelligence with human translation. The way that basically what we're trying to solve is the problem of communication in multiple languages. So until now, typically the translation market, which is already a very big market, was focused on traditional content. So things like manuals and legal and medical. And what we're seeing is this really increase in the amount of content that needs to be made available in multiple languages. So this whole content that is the kind of stuff that companies produce every day, the newsletters and blogs and e-commerce descriptions and travel descriptions and subtitles, etc. And to make this available in multiple languages this is not only a large amount of volume, so there's not enough people in the world to translate it if you wanted to use a more traditional approach, and it's not valuable enough to spend the 15 cents per word, which is the average price of translation. And so what we start thinking is, well, why is this such an issue? Well, you could think about machine translation. A lot of people think, well, but what about Google Translate? But Google Translate is really used by consumers to get the gist of content. And especially for this kind of content, for outbound content that is produced by enterprises, the quality is not there. And it's not going to be there in the next 15 years. That's our belief. And so what we decided to do is, okay, well, what if we combine both things, right? So what if we do a hybrid approach where, in a way, what we're trying to do is say, let's try to get the humans to do the things that humans are really good at, the creative part, the subjective, the nuanced aspects of translation, and try to get as much as possible the machines to do the things that machines are good at, the repetitive tasks, the sort of the consistency checks, the things, the dumb work, let's say.
And when it comes to customers using your product, the way it works is they can send the content in via email, they can download your API, it's then auto-translated and then a human checks it over, right?
Yeah, so the way that the process itself works is we're focused more and more on what we call recurring dynamic content. And typically our customers integrate with our API so that the translation part is part of the whole process of creating the content. In a way, what you want is, as the content is created, by the end of this process is immediately available in multiple languages. And so the way it works internally is we start by doing machine translation, and then we use distributed translation. So we split the initial translation and send each piece to multiple people that work on making it perfect. And in there we have a lot of machine learning to try to understand who are the right people for that particular content, so that we have the right people working on the right content. Then after that, we recombine these chunks and we have senior translators revising this content for consistency and guideline checking, etc. And then sometimes we even add copywriters or native reviewers that are no longer translators. They're just focused on making sure that you have this amazing text that is written really well, etc. And then at the end of it, the content gets posted back to the customer so that it's a very seamless process.
Great, and what's interesting is that you guys are also creating a lot of job opportunities for translators. It's just something to do on the side. I read that one of the top compensated translators is making over $3,000, right?
Yeah.
And is that a month or just in total?
This was 2014, which when we started. Nowadays, actually, it's more. I think we already have a number of people that are working basically exclusively on Unbabel.
Wow.
So the way we compensate people is we pay translators per hour, and it varies between $8 and $18 an hour, which for a market like the US is not very much, but if you think about Brazil or Indonesia, is pretty amazing. And we're still experimenting. I mean, this is going to evolve over time, of course, but the goal is to get people to be able to produce enough value in the translation that we're paying them more and more, right? So the sliding scale here basically changes with depending how fast and how the quality and the speed of the translator. We have this vision for the community, really, which is, if you think about it, kind of more and more there's this whole sharing economy, right? And what we're saying is, look, you don't need to own a lot of these objects. In the case of Airbnb or Uber, you can just share these resources. And at the same time, in a way, within Unbabel, what we're saying is, look, all you need is your cell phone. or a laptop anywhere in the world, you can work, you can make money. And even though initially was meant to be a sort of an extra income, this is becoming bigger and bigger. And the vision here for the community is, well, if we are telling people you can work from anywhere, then it means that we're going to have this roaming community worldwide that's going to be able to live wherever they want, right, and work wherever they want, and be part of Unbabel as they experience different cultures and different experiences, and have interactions with the world, and engage in different language immersions, and that's really important for us, right? So have this idea that communication and language it's not about a static person in one office necessarily. It's that, but also someone that is alive within the communities that they help communicate, that they're helping with communication. And so that's kind of where we see the community evolving, is more and more people having the freedom to not only work where they want, but in doing things that are rewarding for them in a way that, increases and enriches their lives.
Right, and you guys just hit the big 20 million words translated
Yeah.
milestone. That was back in April, right?
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. Yeah, it's been, I think there's this it's weird effect of startup time. We're fairly young, and since we've been around for about a year and a half, and sometimes it feels like it's been years, and sometimes it feels like it was yesterday. And so and things are moving so fast. I mean, we've been growing a lot, and there's so much stuff to do that we kind of joke that at some point it's very easy to forget to celebrate big moments. It's like, hey, we did 20 million words, great. Now let's keep going, right? But you're right, that was a big milestone for us. 20 million words is a nice round number, and suddenly, like a year and a half later, like, that's a lot of content. That was pretty exciting. Yeah, we also hit like 25,000 translators on the platform, which was pretty cool.
That's great. So when you're growing the marketplace in that sense of getting customers and then also making sure that you have the right demand of translators, how do you find that balance?
Very hard to maintain. Yeah, I think that's is with any marketplace, managing supply and demand is probably one of the key aspects of making it successful, right? And this is a little bit like a seesaw, where you're like increasing your supply, and then suddenly, because you have a lot of demand, and then you have more supply than demand, then you increase your demand, and you're kind of going back and forth. We've been experimenting with different models. Initially, we were really trying to just get as many people as we could. And now more and more we're trying to fine tune, be more predictable on the demand that we're going to have, so that we can fine tune the supply accordingly. We find that it's very important for translators to produce quality and to feel rewarded, to have a consistent supply of work. And that tends to work better than having a lot of people working just a little bit in the platform. That being said, mobile is also growing. More and more people are actually translating from their cell phones, and that presents a different profile. So, yeah.
I was not expecting that.
Yeah, about 10 to 15% of all the work right now is being done on cell phones, smartphones, basically.
So do you see that rising then in the future?
Definitely, and we're actually doing a lot of interesting things there. For example, one of the main reason why we think that is not bigger right now is that typing on your cell phone kind of sucks. It's editing text on your cell phone is not the best.
Yeah, hearing you say that, I feel like my fingers would just be killing me.
I know, right? And so one of the things that we're working on is actually, one of the premises of Unbabel is that if you look inside a machine translation engine, there's kind of a graph inside that tells you, here's all the possible paths that could lead to a translation. And imagine each path would be a different translation for that sentence, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the right translation is in there, but because the engine is probabilistic in nature, just pick the wrong path, right? And so one of the things that we're working on is on this concept of interactive machine translation, where instead of typing, you, for the most part, select different paths, right? And so what this means is this creates an effective way of translating on your cell phone, where you're actually picking options. You have a text and you see an error, you select it, and here's multiple options, and you just select, here's the correct translation. And we're experimenting with that, and the results are pretty encouraging. We think that if you can actually come up with an interface that enables you to be effective on the cell phone, that could be tremendous, because not only in developing countries more and more people have smartphones rather than than desktop computers. But it's also the accessibility of you can actually access the right person right there, right? So turnaround time could be much faster.
Yeah, when it comes to early challenges that you guys have faced building a young startup, I know one of them was early on there was too many translators who felt like you were just saying there wasn't enough
Yeah.
demand and they want to keep having work. I know one of the things that you wanted to eliminate with your seed financing last year was that problem of not being able to serve the translators. Have you guys been able to solve that?
Somewhat. We've made a lot of progress in that. I wouldn't say that we solved it, right? I mean, I think the ideal situation where there's always going to be one of the problems, right? So you either, unless we do a perfect job, you either have customers that are waiting for translations, or you're going to have translators that are waiting for more words, right? And so we've made a lot of strides in managing that process better. But I wouldn't say we solved it yet. A lot of the things that we've done is more understanding who we are, right? And so understanding how to focus and where are we solving the biggest pain. I think one of the issues that the language is this universal thing, right? I mean, it's one of the few things you do every day is talk, right? I mean, interact with other people using language. And so there's a ton of different applications and routes and paths we could take for growth. But at the same time, we have the typical challenge of a startup, which is we have way more things to do than we have resources to do them. So we need to focus, right? And in this case, there's a kind of an abundance of riches in the sense that, people want to translate 50,000 different things. And the more we understand where are we actually solving the biggest pain, the easier it is to solve everything else, right? The easier it is to understand how to manage the supply and demand, to create predictability in the marketplace, etc. And I think that's the core issue, is this understanding who we are, and then everything else kind of stems from that.
When you say that you're trying to solve the absolute biggest pain, like just focus on one thing, which once we talk about YC, I know that's a big thing that you guys learned there. What is the one thing, the one growth metric that you guys are really honed in on right now?
So the biggest growth metric for us generally is number of paid words translated per week.
Okay.
And then we have three other KPIs that we focus on. One is the number of words created. So not the ones that were translated, but like kind of you can measure in terms of sales, right? How many new paid words were made available in the platform. Mm-hmm. The other is the quality. That is super, super important. So what's the quality of the translation that's coming out of the platform? And then finally is the cost per word. So the idea of the cost per word is actually it represents the technology. So what we fundamentally believe is that as the technology gets better and better, that will drive down the cost per word. And so that's a way of measuring that.
And right now you guys are actually 77% less cost per word than other
Yeah.
services, right?
Yeah. And our goal is to make that, way, way lower.
When it comes to the metrics that you've seen so far, we were discussing this before we started recording. What are the biggest markets for translation? Where are you seeing the most words translated?
Right now, Brazilian Portuguese. We're seeing a huge demand in Chinese and German. Those are, we can't onboard people fast enough to serve those markets. In Brazilian Portuguese, the community was more mature, and so I think there's also this aspect of the community where once you hit critical mass, it gets easier and easier to expand. But Brazilian Portuguese, I would say, and then Russian also, it's a big market. So I would say they're typically large markets, with the exception of Germany. I would say they're large markets where people don't speak a lot of English, right? And so what you're seeing that driving that growth a lot is you have a lot of American companies that are kind of hitting the phase where they're going international. They became like internet companies becoming bigger, and suddenly those markets are very appealing. They're expanding, and that leads to this whole need for consistent and continuous translation. And then what we expect actually going forward, I would expect in 2 or 3 years to start seeing the reverse, where China into other markets is probably, China is huge. You have 20% of the population that's kind of getting into the middle class. They're going to start, like you have Chinese companies that are maturing now, they're big in China, and they're starting to think about, okay, now we need to start tackling other markets. And I think that's going to be a huge driver for translation too.
Great. I want to dive into your experience at YC because I
Sure.
know that's one of the things you were just emphasizing is that you have to find like what's the main problem. Let's hone in on that and solve that first because it's going to help everything else. Tell me about your experiences there.
It was great. I mean, YC. I think probably this is a common feedback. It's awesome, and it was hard. It was intense, hard, but very very um, useful and valuable for us. We were five co-founders, so we were the biggest company in our batch. We're all from Portugal, but the majority of us had a lot of experience abroad. I mean, I lived in the US for about 10 years before, and so the culture itself wasn't a shock at all. One of the things that was interesting was this very kind of, as a friend of mine puts it, YC is the relentless pursuit of growth, and so there's a lot of it is the philosophy behind it is fairly simple, right? I mean, the basic rules are simple, focus on one thing and just focus on growing that one metric. Don't just build a good company by, either building product or talking to customers. Don't lose focus and concentration. Like those are all simple things, right? But just doing them consistently in a very applied manner, that's the hard part. I think that and having experience, one of my previous startups, we went through Alpha Lab in Pittsburgh, and which was great. But Sophia, one of my co-founders, went through Surge in Texas, and we had a lot of experience also with Seed Camp in Europe, and we were mentors in Lisbon Challengers in Portugal. So we had some accelerators slash incubator experience, and YC is definitely different than all of the other ones. On one hand, it's more intense and more hands-off at the same time. So in our case, five co-founders who rented a two-bedroom apartment. So if you had one room, the four guys in another room, bunk beds. If you're living that amount of time, that much time with other people, and you get along, that's probably a very good sign. If there's going to be something that really annoys you, it's going to come out really really soon. So even going through that kind of a boot camp experience, that helps. Then like honing in on being able to think and breed your startup 24 hours a day with this great excuse to avoid all other social engagements, it's sometimes painful but very valuable. And then it's kind of the whole YC mentality. And I think YC sees themselves, the idea is more of almost like a university. If you think about like a top tier university, so take, I don't know, Carnegie Mellon, right? I mean, it's hard to get into Carnegie Mellon. I'm using Carnegie Mellon because I went to Carnegie Mellon, but it could be MIT or Stanford. Like any really tough place to get into as a university, it's hard to get into. But once you get there, you will not be given a high grade just because you're there, And so that's kind of the philosophy of YC is like, great, obviously you have to be smart and focused to get into YC, but now that you're here, it's not just about being here. And the feeling that we had with other incubators was a little bit different. It was more of a family type thing, where it's more like, it's really hard to get in. Once you're in, you're kind of like, we're going to, back you up. We're going to like prop you up and like take you under our wing and help you. And that's very helpful in a lot of ways. YC is a little bit more, you really have to struggle hard, but it brings out the best in you, I think. And it's very honest. I think there's this honesty about, look, you're going to try and do your best, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but it's better to find out as soon as possible. And then if it does work out, then you're focused on the right things. That's the kind of YC experience. And for us, it was very valuable, hard but valuable.
Who are some of the mentors that you worked closely with while you were there?
Aaron Harris and Jeff Ralstein were the two main partners. Sam at the time before, so we were in the last batch where Paul Graham was kind of leading YC. Sam Altman, we met a few times with him. Gary Tan. There was, you interact with the partners, right? So we had really valuable conversations with a lot of them. Kevin Hale was awesome in terms of all the interaction and helping us understand friction on kind of UI experience. Each partner has different expertise. They are all very brutally honest, which is, like I said, sometimes hard but incredibly valuable, right? It saves a lot of time. It gets you in the right direction. I think that's pretty cool. And they have a lot of, all of them were very successful founders, and so they get what you're going through.
You mentioned friction on UI. Can you dive into some of the lessons you learned there?
Yeah, so in our case, at the time, we had initially we were betting a lot on a self-service platform. The first thing we wanted to build was an easy way for people to just get into Unbabel and start using us, right? And so we were putting up all sorts of barriers. We're like, okay, well, before you get in, here's all of the 50 steps you need to, make, to do, create an account, do this other thing, and then eventually you get to a point where you can, request some translation. And Kevin Hale was like, look, if your goal is to get people as soon as possible onboarded, he actually went in, sat down with us, went through it, and pointed out very specific things like, here's the things you need to change to reduce friction on this interaction. The same thing on the interaction with editors, right? I mean, if you're sometimes even small things, small changes on the interface make a huge difference. Like as a specific example, we used to be that in Unbabel as a translator, you would request a task, translate it, and then afterwards you'd have to click another button that says, okay, give me another task, right? And at some point, something as simple as saying, well, as soon as you finish a task, we'll give you another one right away, like tripled the speed that people were translated. It was insane. It was like, oh my God, this was a really simple change, and it made such a huge difference.
You mentioned that one of the things while you were there is the honesty of everyone, whether it's honesty from the partners or honesty just in the fact that it's 5 people living in one place and you're going to have to be honest about what you like and you don't like. When it comes to running the business, how important is the team's work in not holding on to feedback that may seem like criticism? So just getting it off your chest and moving on.
You mean within the team or?
Yeah, within the team.
Outside?
So like if you have feedback for someone that, maybe they've been working on something and you think there's a couple of changes, instead of just saying like, hey, this is great and letting that harbor, how do you just get it off your chest in a way that's constructive?
So I have kind of a theory on that.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah. So my theory on that is like startups have a lot of different types of debt, and one that is very commonly talked about is it's technical debt, like it's this, oh, if you have technical debt as a startup, that's okay because as long as you have to pay that back, right? And you can think about other types of debt, like sales debt. When you begin, like you don't know what you're doing. You're like, just try to muddle it through. The same thing on marketing debt. You don't have a marketing team, so you kind of make do, and you understand you have to pay that back. As founders, I think the one thing you can't really accumulate is emotional debt. I think that's the number one thing that kills startups. And emotional debt is basically what you're saying, right? It's like this ability to give feedback and to tell your co-founders, like during the week, and obviously a startup is stressful. It's very easy to have the little things that you don't say because you're like, oh, I'm just tired, I want to focus on a different thing, I don't want to talk about this right now. But those things accumulate, and then when big issues come around, you end up discussing the things, you discuss everything else. It's like a relationship, right? I mean, like, I'm married almost 15 years now, and it's important to talk about things because at some point you start arguing not about the thing that you're arguing at the moment, but about everything else that you didn't, right? So it's this accumulated debt that you're paying off. For us, actually, what we've done from the beginning is we try to do something that helps with that, right? And it doesn't, there's something that we do, but it doesn't have to be that thing. Each team should have their own thing. For us, it's surfing. So we go surf together. And what this causes is, my analysis of this, let's say, is, first of all, we suck at surfing. We're really bad. But we enjoy it. And I think what happens is surfing is this activity that is very physical and that forces you to have to focus on what you're doing in the moment, right? Because there's way too many things happening around you, but also gets you tired. And after that, we have lunch by the beach, right? There's like one morning a week that the whole team goes surfing. And it used to be that we used to do that as founders, and now we extended it. And what this means is that there's this moment afterwards that 2 things happen. One, you're kind of tired and relaxed, and so you're not tense, and it's easier to talk about stuff. And 2, you've just been reminded that you're doing something with people that you actually enjoy doing things with. It's like, oh yeah, it turns out I like these people. They're actually my friends also. It's not just about work. And that makes it much easier to have hard conversations if you keep that in mind. I think one of the hardest things is when you're having this conversation and then suddenly you really feel like, wait, this person has good intentions. Like, this is not coming from a bad place. It's actually, in a constructive way. That thought, like if you permeate with that feeling, then the communication is much easier. And I think what it does in effect is like clears our emotional debt. We always feel that help, right? But I think that's the key aspect. It's like not letting it build up. Sometimes it's like accountability is hard, right? I mean, that was one of the things that people used to say in YC, and it's like that's one of the hardest things is making sure, like, being accountable and making your co-founders accountable for things is hard because it usually involves hard conversations. So finding ways that you make those hard conversations easier and kind of flow better helps clear up the whole, unclog the system.
I love it. Before we shift away from YC, I do want to go back to demo day because I was able to watch your pitch, and I loved how you framed it because you said, this is what we have right now, this is what we need, this isn't working, here's a solution. For someone who hasn't been to YC, like for me, for example, you give that pitch, there's a wide audience listening to you. What happens after?
Wow, and YC demo days was crazy, right? It's really is crazy. I mean, there's a lot of factors into it, and it's unique even for Silicon Valley standards. I think it's this combination of 600 investors in one room that are very geared up to invest in companies, and at the same time, a scarcity of resources in the companies that they're, it creates this dynamics that is unusual for a company where it turns the tables, right? It really highlights the fact that the companies are the scarce resource and not the investors. And so it creates this forcing function where investors, act much faster, right? I mean, I feel that for an investor, like there's Paul Graham wrote about this great, and really well. There's the two basic forces, right? There's the fear of not investing in a company that is going to be really successful, and the fear of investing in a company that is bad, right? And unless you have a forcing function, the best move is to not do anything, right? And so to say, yeah, I don't want to be away, but I don't want to be in until there's something that moves me either way. And Demo Day kind of, embodies that forcing function. And so what happens is, people go crazy. Like after Demo Day, like literally during Demo Day, some of the companies raised $2 million on the spot, right? With people coming in and like committing, 100, 200, 300, 500, 700 on the spot, lining up to invest in the company was, but not all companies, right? Half the companies didn't raise money that day. Half the companies raised money. And within the ones that raised money, some raised these ridiculous amounts in like 15 minutes. It was insane. And then after that, basically, the typical scenarios, you have like a ton of follow-ups. We got like 60 meetings out of that, that you do in the next week. So there's this rush in the next week of like adrenaline of, 5 meetings a day, talking to a bunch of people and just closing the round. It is, and we know this, now that it's been a year, it's very apparent. It is the easiest time you're ever going to get raising money in the life of the company. Doesn't mean that it's always easy to everyone, but compared to what's coming next, it is the easiest time.
Enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, definitely.
When it came to, you said you had 60 meetings. Obviously, you don't have 60 investors. How did you evaluate them?
It's a marriage process, right? I mean, on one hand, you're going to get some no's, you're going to say some no's. You're making decisions in a way with uncertain information, right? I mean, you have 1 hour of interaction with that person, and they have about 1 hour of interaction with you to understand who your company is, and they have their track record as investors where you can, talk to other founders, do some due diligence, but in the end, you don't know the person that well, right? There's going to be something where, with your co-founders, you've been maybe a year, 2 years having like continuous time with them. With investors at that point, you have like, a pitch, an hour conversation, and you have to make a decision. So a lot of it is referrals, a lot of it is past record, is their vision, feeling that there's a fit between what they believe and what you believe, feeling that it makes sense. Like for us, for example, it was important at the time to do two things. One was to have a chance to interact with multiple investors, like to build a relationship in the seed stage so that by the time we get to a Series A, we would know who we actually wanted to work with, like more seriously. Yeah, and at the same time, given that Unbabel is a very international company and there's several markets that we thought were very important to us, we wanted to get on board, investors that could help us penetrate those markets. So for example, IDG Partners in China is one of our investors, and Digital Garage in Japan is one of our investors, right? As well as investors in Silicon Valley. And that was very strategic for us because even though, it's right now it's not yet as much of the focus as it will be in the future, having that bridge and that relationship will be tremendously valuable, the more we want to penetrate those markets. Not all companies are the same. In our cases, from moment zero, Unbabel was international, so that made sense.
When it came to the deciding factor, like you were just saying, a lot of it does have to do with that sense of like a marriage. Like, is there a chemistry here? Can I see being with them and working with them for a long time? Can you give me an example of how that went with one of your partners? Maybe Jared at Matrix. I know he led the round for you guys.
Yeah, we didn't have a lead per se because
Okay.
it was safe, right? But Matrix and Google Ventures were probably two lead, in the sense, more distinctive investors. With Jared, I mean, we had a meeting afterwards. Went in, talked to him, had another second meeting with the partners. He was probably the investor that did the most due diligence on Unbabel. He talked to some people. We had like a very heart-to-heart conversation about what kind of CEO was I going to be, and this kind of strong conversation. But I mean, Jared is amazing, right? I mean, he's incredibly smart. He gets it. He has got a very aligned vision. He is very supportive. Very quick to respond. There's a lot of really good things, right? He's honest, direct. There's a lot of qualities that I really like, and a lot of great referrals. So that was kind of a no-brainer. Matrix is a great brand. They have a great track record. They have the means and ability to follow on if they choose. And even for them, it was also kind of it was an opportunity to see whether this is a good fit for the long term, right? I mean, the same thing with Google Ventures was kind of, they invested actually before Demo Day, which was unexpected for us, but we had one meeting with Kevin Rose and Chris Hutchins. So Chris Hutchins was the person that connected us to Google Ventures. He was an associate at the time. I think the partners, what they called the partner. I don't remember exactly the name the title he had at the time. It doesn't matter. Chris Hutchins. And he brought Kevin Rose to the meeting. We had half-an-hour meeting, and we just hit it off. It was like, they get it. They completely get it, right? And they understand exactly what we're trying to do. They get the vision. This is something, unfortunately now Kevin Rose is no longer in Google Ventures, and so it was great interacting with Chris, and it was great interacting with Kevin. Now Kevin is no longer there, but that interaction was very smooth. It was very frictionless, without friction, right? So, yeah.
You mentioned that when you were looking to get an investment from Matrix, Jared asked you what kind of CEO you're going to be. It's a big question. How do you answer?
Well, to give you a little bit of context, I think the main reasons for that question were, one, there's 5 co-founders, so how do we make decisions, right? What's the decision process? And the other is, sometimes being a CEO means making hard decisions. How willing or able would I be to make the hard decisions? I think, and what were my weak points, right? And I think, on one hand, I'm very comfortable with technology. That's my background. And I'm very comfortable with vision because, like the ideas of where I think we want to get. Things that are less, that I have less experience is like pure sales, right? It's not something, so for him also was a way to understand, okay, what are the strengths that you have to build out in our team and we have to be careful for, right? You wanted to understand that the communication within the founders was great, but at the same time that we all felt that there was one CEO. Sometimes, it's very hard for a startup to work as a true democracy. It's very important to have open communication, but it is important sometimes to have an ability for people to make decisions without having to have those decisions by committee, right? And this goes through the entire, it's not just at the CEO level, it's at every level, right? I mean, if you're responsible if you own something, you have to be able to communicate your decisions and have input from the rest of the team, but you also have to be able to have the freedom to make your decisions in a way that is efficient. So that was kind of the and then I mean there's hard parts of being a CEO. Like firing people sucks. I hate it, right? But it's important to understand like that as a CEO, the good of the company comes first, right? And to separate that is sometimes hard but necessary.
You've been in startups for nearly your whole career. You've had some before that weren't as
Yeah.
successful as Unbabel so far. What made you want to do it again? Because you could easily go and get a very high paying job, not as a founder.
That's true. Well, like I think the moment that I felt that I really wanted to do startups was I was an intern at Google, and it was an amazing place, right? I mean, it was this kind of Disneyland for for engineers. You got like amazing people around you, limitless resources, great projects, great environment. The one thing that you do feel is that your likelihood of having a strong impact in the company is very low because there's so many amazing people around you and it's so big that you're like small. And one thing that I always felt is there's this drive of having the ability to influence things around you. I think that's something that drives me. The ability to create something and to kind of get my vision and create it and see it flourish and feel that that's going to have an impact in the world. I think that's something that drives me too. And I like the roller coaster of emotions. Like I think I was talking to the guys at reCAPTCHA a while back after they were acquired by Google and asking them like, how does it feel like? What was the differences? And I remember this answer was like, well, it feels like once you work, the difference between a startup and a company like Google is that the amplitude of your emotions is lower, right? And it's like in a startup, the highs are really high, right? It's like, oh my God, we're going to rule the world. This is amazing. And the lows are really low. Like, what have we done? This is insane. We're all going to die, right? In a bigger company, the highs are not as high. It's like, great, yeah, this was successful, but it's not going to change this whole company. And the lows are not that low. At the end of the month, I get my paycheck still. There's a lot of security there. And I think that's also appealing, to be honest, I also always felt at the times like, well, if I'm going to do a startup, this is the time to do it when I started. And that turned into four, right? So I just felt I haven't gone to a place where I feel like, okay, I've achieved what I was looking for, and now I want to try something different. And once you fall in love with an idea, maybe I'm a romantic. I don't know. I fall in love with ideas, and then you see them happen.
You mentioned the highs and the lows, and I think it's like everyone says the highs are incredible, but the lows can be pretty rough, especially for founders. If you're running out of money, there's so many things that can go wrong for a startup. You
Yeah,
were a solo co-founder for a period of time when you were working on Bueda. Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
yeah,
How
yeah.
was that? Because I feel like the lows must have been 10 times lower because you were experiencing them alone.
Yes, definitely. They were. I mean, there were. I can give you kind of two similar situations. Um, in Bueda and in Babel, right? So in both situations, there was a time where I felt that like that basically we're running out of money, right? And I had already kids in both situations. So at Bueda I had 3 kids, and in Babel I had 4 kids. And in both situations, my wife wasn't working, so I was the sole provider, right? The single income, and so running out of money in the startup in this case was in both cases complicated to say the least, right? But in Bueda was really a lot of nights without sleeping, a lot of like, oh my God, this could be really bad, and what's going to happen? And in Babel, the fact that I felt that, I always felt that as long as we're together, it's going to work out okay. Like we're covered, like I know that no matter how hard things get, as long as we're together, as long as this emotional debt doesn't keep piling up, as long as I feel that we're solid as a team, we're going to make it okay. Uh, and we did in both situations, but in different ways.
One of the things that really shocked me about your team, I think it's so interesting, is you shared that when you guys, especially in the early days, were figuring out how to pay yourselves, you did it based on who needs what. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like you guys have $10, everyone gets $2. You did it on, you have 4 kids, someone else is in their 20s. Tell me about that decision because I can hardly see a lot of other companies following suit with that.
Yeah, someone at NYC pointed out it wasn't on purpose. It's like, hey, you guys are very communist. We're like, what? What do you mean? It's like, well, it's like to each their needs. It feels like we didn't think about it this way. It was more like our thought process on this is okay. So the real outcome for us is on the equity, right? I mean, on one hand. On the other was, especially in the beginning, and still is the case, like no one's getting rich, right? No one. It's not about getting paid enough that you
Buy
are
a
making
Bentley. Yeah.
right, or even are increasing your savings and doing all of that, right? So we in the beginning, especially, we were very much in survival mode. And the only difference is that we need different amounts to survive because of the different phases in our lives where we are, right? And since we all needed each other, we kind of did what we had to do to make sure that everybody was able to survive, right? And then what we said was, look, we'll do kind of as we go forward, we'll do it in reverse. So the people that needed more in the beginning will increase more slowly than other people, right? And so we came up with some strategy where the people that had less needs, because there's kind of multiple arguments for this. One of them is you can say, well, it's not it's not one of the founders' fault that the other founder has a higher burn rate, right? I mean it should be compensated on the value. But if you factor in the equity, then realistically the money is insignificant, right? If you start saying, well, here's the valuation of the company, and you're vesting your equity, so the amount of money that you're getting per month on your equity is vastly superior to the amount of money you're making, in cash. So that kind of evens things out. And then in terms of actual salary, we'll progress in inverse proportion to how much money you're getting in the beginning. Our goal at some point is to get everybody being paid market salary to the function and what they're doing in the company. The important part, I mean, of course, this was reasonable. Everybody for us, right? Everybody felt at ease with it, and that was actually a great sign. Was the fact that everybody was actually at ease, not at ease in the sense of, yeah, okay, I guess I'll have to go along and then regret it, but actually feeling I am totally fine with it, right? And that was a great sign that whatever we had going was working in terms of chemistry as founders. We really understood each other. That was I think, a very good sign. And then once we got funding, we moved into like, okay, the first phase was literally survival mode, right? Like, what's the minimum you need to have a roof over your head, right? And then once we got funding, was like, okay, what's the minimum you need so that you're not worrying whether you're going to have money to pay your rent at the end of the month, right? Where you're like, okay, well, so that you're not thinking about money. There's a certain amount that you're like, I feel comfortable, no luxuries, nobody's becoming rich, nobody's, like I say, increasing their savings or anything like that. But like, okay, if you want to have dinner once a month out, that's fine, right? You don't feel like you have to keep every day looking at your bank account to make sure that nothing, like that. It's a comfortable level on the low end, right? And that was fine too.
Very cool. I think it says a lot about your organization and where you guys are going in the future. So it's certainly exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, hopefully one day we'll be all saying, now we're all in this super luxury. But that's not going to be on the investor's money, right? The feeling that we have, especially until we are profitable, until the business itself and the company can support that, doesn't make sense to do it.
Absolutely. I want to close with a couple of questions on the startup scene in Portugal. In a previous interview, I loved that you said, we don't need to recreate Silicon Valley, but we need to have the same type of successes. Is that possible without creating that environment of mentorship, resources, capital, and all of those things that are contributing to these companies?
So that's a great question, right? Like I said, I think the goal of recreating Silicon Valley is a foolish one. I mean, Silicon Valley is just this unique place, even within the U.S., right? I mean, there's no other Silicon Valley within the U.S.
Exactly, like New York and Silicon Valley, very different.
Yeah, right. And I think that Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley and San Francisco nowadays make me think of what probably Florence felt like during the Renaissance, the epicenter of the Renaissance world, where people were moving into it to be part of the discussions. Cool. And that's something that's been very exciting, about Silicon Valley and San Francisco, is this idea that people are coming from all over the world. It is about technology, etc., but it's more important than that. Is the things that are shaping humanity are starting, the discussions are starting there. Like the whole autonomous vehicles, like sharing economy, genomics. There's bitcoins, like currency, government, like all of this, and then you have like this really amazingly smart people that want to be there to have critical mass around these discussions. That's really exciting. When I talk about Portugal, is Portugal in its history, and it's true with a lot of countries, we've been very entrepreneurial. In the discovery time, Portugal had an empire. For geographical reasons, we were always forced to look outside of our boundaries. We're a small country. We're surrounded by water, except for Spain, which now obviously we're very good friends with. But for a long time, Portugal and Spain were bitter enemies. So we really didn't have ways to go out. Right, the only way was the sea, and that led to being resourceful and having to be entrepreneurial. And so that's kind of in our DNA. The one thing that I am noticing in startups in Portugal is that there is already a number of startups that are becoming very successful, and they all startup in Portugal. Like you can think of the example of Israel, right? Israel, again, much more advanced than we are in this state, but the majority of startups in Israel that are successful, they might start in Israel, but from almost moment zero, they're thinking, okay, we're going to set up an office in the US, and their investment is coming a lot from the US and other places. The same is starting to happen in Portugal. So Talkdesk, Venium, Feedzai, Uniplaces, Unbabel, Cedars. These are all companies that were born in Portugal. They have development product in Portugal, but they very quickly from the get-go established themselves in different markets, either in London or San Francisco, where they have investment from foreign investors. They're much more multinational, and I think that's something that the whole globalization process, movement, or trend that's happening is also helping with. What's missing now is the kind of, if this was a story in this arc, we're missing the heroes. Like everybody's in the trenches right now, and you need a few people that make it enough that can then reinvest in the ecosystem and become kind of the bridges, right? And this is not something that happens overnight. But I am seeing very, very positive. And it helps in a lot of ways. For example, Portugal, is a very educated young community, and people speak English fairly well. We are very used to different cultures. We travel easily. Like even in terms of, for example, visa-wise, right? Portugal has amazing relationships with pretty much all the countries in the world. It's a European Western country with very non-threatening politics, right? So if there's typically, when you go into a country, if that country has some sort of visa agreement with someone, Portugal usually is one of those, right? We have a visa waiver for the US, so we can visit whenever we want, and the same to India and China, right? Because we've been having relationships with those countries, with Japan and China and India for 500 years, right? So even that, and we're the most Western country in Europe, right? In terms of, we're in the same time zone as London, but we're the closest to the US, right? So, and we have a large immigrant population spread throughout the world. So all of this is a good basis, and for a while people weren't really focused on entrepreneurship, and then now what's happening with the crisis, there's been a big crisis here, a lot of austerity measures, is that what you're seeing is people say, you know what, if I don't have a steady job anyway, I'm going to start my own thing, right? And now suddenly, and this is also a wave that's not just in Portugal, it's kind of happening throughout the world. In Portugal, I feel that there's a lot of the right conditions for it to, turn into a big flame, and we're seeing a lot of that. And then even geographically, like if you come to, I don't know if you have the chance to visit Lisbon, it's fairly similar to San Francisco geographically. Like the weather is great. You have this urban city. It's a European capital. We even have like a replica of the Golden Gate. It's in Lisbon. You feel in a very international environment. For example, for us and Unbabel, one of the reasons to maintain like development and product here is anybody in Europe can move to Portugal and doesn't need a visa to work, right? Which means that recruiting in Silicon Valley is really hard right now, engineering talent. There's a huge amount of competition. Recruiting in Europe, if you're a YC company, Matrix and Google funded, working on a really cool problem, it's much, much easier to recruit. And then you can, if you tell someone that lives in Germany, hey, do you want to work in a company like this, but in a place that has, great weather and, it really helps.
And mostly your team is in Portugal, but you guys also have some people in San Francisco?
Yeah, it's basically marketing and sales in San Francisco, and then product and technology in Portugal.
Yeah, and so you go back and forth, like you were saying before.
I do. I commute.
So how is that experience as a founder because obviously when you're in one place, you're not in the other?
Yeah. So that is actually, of course, it's a challenge, right? I mean, the ideal scenario is everybody's in one location. It does help that we're five, right? And which means that even when I'm traveling, Sophia, who is leading marketing and sales, founder full-time in San Francisco, and João, CTO, leading technology full-time in Portugal, right? And so there's always someone full-time like present, right? It's not like you don't feel like, oh, when I'm in one place, the other side is suffering. So that really helps.
Great. I know one of the reasons you were just here was the Collision conference. How was that?
It was great. It was great. I heard. It was my first Collision. A lot of people had been to the Web Summit and Collision. I feel that it was great in the connections. It was big. We're still trying to see. We'll see the actual outcome in terms of like sales, etc. in a few weeks. That's happening now. I did get some feedback from people that were in both, saying they felt Web Summit was a little bit better. And I think the main reason for that was more the environment. I think in Dublin, Web Summit basically takes over Dublin. So
cool.
you're right. It's like 20,000 people in downtown. So anywhere you go in downtown, basically you're in Web Summit. And in downtown Vegas, it's not on the strip, but there's still a lot of people. You don't feel like you own that place. You feel like, okay, you're in a hotel. It was definitely cool, right? But a lot of people were saying like Web Summit was just amazing and Collision was great, but not as kind of mind-blowing as Web Summit.
Very cool. Vasco, thank you so much for spending so much time with me today and really running me through not only the ins and outs of your business, but the lessons that you've learned as a founder along the way.
Cool. My pleasure. And it was great being here.
How can everyone stay up to date with what you're doing and see how they can start using Unbabel?
So check out unbabel.com. Check out our blog. Send me an email. Our Twitter account is @Unbabel. Facebook is Unbabel. Just search Unbabel. You'll find us.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks.